He came for peace and privacy, a $150 plot of land, tucked between two forgotten hills, with a half-broken barn and nothing but dust for miles. But as soon as Silas stepped onto the property, he saw them. Two towering women standing like statues by the barn door, their dresses billowing like sails in the prairie wind. One smiled like she already knew every secret he kept. The other sized him up like he was a slice of pie, served too small but just tempting enough to savor. Before we dig into what happens next, drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. And if you love stories that twist your expectations and stir your heart, hit that subscribe button because what happens next will leave you hungry for more. The sun beat down hard on the cracked soil as Silas clutched the rolled-up deed in one hand and adjusted the brim of his hat with the other. His boots stirred dust with every step as he approached what was supposed to be his new start: 10 acres of hard land, one barn, one well, and not a soul in sight. That's what the listing said. Quiet, unclaimed, ready to be rebuilt, just the way he liked it. But what the papers didn't mention were the two women already standing there like they owned the place. One was wearing a dress the color of ripe cherries, with arms crossed under a generous chest and a look that was more curious than hostile. The other, clad in mustard yellow, had her weight shifted onto one hip, her hand resting lightly on her round belly as if she were daring him to ask a question. Both of them were massive in a way that wasn't just physical. They filled the space like permanent fixtures, like windmills or rooted trees. Silas stopped dead in his tracks. "Afternoon," he said cautiously, tipping his hat. "Didn't expect company." The woman in red cracked a smile. "We're not company, sweetheart. We're ingredients." Silas blinked. "I'm sorry." The woman in yellow stepped forward, and it was only now that he realized just how tall they were, both standing head and shoulders above him, their shadows wide and long across the dry earth. "You look like dessert." "Size trouble," she said, voice smooth like honey on cornbread. "And we've been craving something sweet." Silas cleared his throat and held up the deed like a shield. "I bought this land fair and square, from a Marcus Wilk." Their expressions didn't change. If anything, they softened, like they were watching a child explain fire for the first time. "Oh, we know Marcus," said the one in red. "Real smooth talker, real slippery hands." "He didn't tell you about us?" the other asked, her voice almost playful. Silas shook his head. "He said the land was empty." "Empty?" The red dress woman let out a laugh, rich, round, and unhurried. "Now that's just rude." The woman in yellow took another step closer. "Tell you what, little man. Before you unpack your saddlebag and start planting flags, maybe come inside the barn. We've got papers too, and pies cooling on the table. You might find the place a little more occupied than you were promised." Silas looked between them. The heat, the dust, the faint smell of something cinnamon sweet drifting from the barn behind them. Whatever Marcus had sold him, it wasn't solitude. It was something much more complicated, and possibly much more dangerous. The barn door creaked open on hinges that sounded too well-oiled to match the rest of the rundown property. Silas followed the two women inside, boots crunching over a scatter of stray hay and old boards. The temperature dropped in the shade, but the air felt no less thick, a mixture of sweat, sugar, and something almost floral. "Name's Clara," said the woman in red, her dress swaying around her calves as she moved with surprising grace for someone her size. "And that's June," she added, nodding toward the woman in yellow, who gave Silas a slow smile that made him feel about 3 feet tall. "Silas," he said. "Silas Crane." "Well, Silas," Clara said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear as she pulled out a chair for him. "Have a seat before you melt. We don't bite." She paused, then added with a wink, "Not unless we're in the mood." June walked past him, her arm grazing his shoulder with deliberate weight, and for a moment he forgot what he was even here for. The barn was cleaner than expected, part living space, part kitchen, part something else entirely. The table was set for 3, and sure enough, there were 2 cooling pies in the center, the scent so strong it made his stomach growl. June heard it. "You hungry, little one?" "I'm fine," Silas said quickly. "Sure you are," she teased. "But you look like you haven't had a proper meal in days, all wiry and lean like a dried-up breadstick." She tilted her head. "Cute, though. Like a tiny side dish someone forgot to eat." Silas blinked. "Excuse me?" "Oh, don't get flustered," Clara said, slicing into the pie with a well-practiced hand. "We appreciate all kinds of appetites out here. Yours, ours. It's just polite to see if anyone's hungry." June leaned in, voice low and syrupy. "And from the look of you, I'd say we've been starvin'." He didn't know whether to laugh, stand up, or run for the nearest fence. But instead, he stayed seated. Eyes darting to the second set of documents Clara placed gently in front of him. "What's this?" "Paperwork Marcus signed," Clara said calmly. "It ain't the deed, but it's more binding than you'd think," June added. "He made promises, the kind you don't walk away from just because you find someone else to buy your problems." Silas scanned the top line. Joint Stewardship Agreement. It had his parcel number. It had Marcus's signature. It had words like companionship, shared domestic duties, and equitable cohabitation. "I didn't sign this," he said, even as his hand trembled slightly. "No," Clara said, her voice soft but firm. "But the minute you stepped onto this land, you became part of the recipe." June's smile was slow and certain. "And sugar, you might just be the finishing touch." Silas stared down at the parchment, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It looked official, too official. The ink was dark, the seal waxed, and Marcus Wilkes' signature scrawled across the bottom with a kind of lazy confidence that made Silas's stomach turn. He flipped to the next page. There were more signatures, more clauses, and one sentence that stuck out like a splinter. "The bearer of title shall assume all relational and domestic obligations as established in the original agreement, unless otherwise renegotiated in person." What the hell is this?" he muttered. Clara leaned her elbow on the table, resting her chin in her palm. "It's a promise Marcus made. A contract. He agreed to live here. With us. Work the land. Cook. Share the bed, the books, the burdens." June sat down beside him, hips filling the chair to the point of creaking wood. "He said he was in for the long haul, that we'd build something together. Turns out, what he meant was until he found a sucker to offload his share onto." Silas shook his head. "This can't be legal." "Maybe not in the city," Clara said. "But out here, what's signed and stamped carries weight. And Marcus knew what he was doing. That's why he sold you the land for dirt." He looked between the two women. June's brow was furrowed, her fingers gently fidgeting with the fabric of her sleeve. Clara just looked tired. Not threatening, not angry, just disappointed in a way that twisted something in Silas's chest. "Look, I don't want to get in the middle of whatever mess he left behind," Silas said. "I didn't know about any of this." Clara's eyes flicked to him. "We believe you, but belief doesn't put food on the table," June added. "Quieter now. And it won't hold off the traitors Marcus owes." Silas leaned back in the chair, rubbing his temple. "So what, you expect me to just take his place, like nothing happened?" "We expect you to look at the situation," Clara said. "Really look at it. Because Marcus didn't just leave us a mess. He left behind an opportunity for you too." June's voice was softer than he'd heard it so far. "This land's rich. We've worked it, planted it, kept it alive. The house is half built. The fields are nearly ready for winter harvest. You wouldn't be starting from scratch, Silas. You'd be joining something real." Silas looked down at the papers again. The handwriting, the seal, the line about companionship that felt more binding than the ink it was printed in. He didn't know what was more unsettling, that he might be tied to some backwoods marriage contract, or that a part of him wasn't entirely against it. The sun was dipping low when Clara rose from the table, brushing pie crumbs from her lap. "Come on," she said, nodding toward the open barn doors. "You've seen the papers. Now it's time to see what you're actually walking into." Silas followed her out, June trailing just behind, silent now. Outside, the sky had turned that golden hue that made everything look kinder, softer, even the dry land. But as they walked past the barn and over a gentle rise behind it, the terrain transformed. There, tucked into a shallow valley, was an orchard. Neatly pruned trees stood in proud rows, their leaves full and heavy, their roots clearly thriving in the sun-baked soil. Peaches, apples, even some fig trees along the far side. The earth beneath them was damp, irrigated, well-tended. It was land that had been loved. Silas stopped in his tracks. "You thought you were buying a dead plot," Clara said beside him, her voice quiet but edged with pride. "But this land's been alive for years." June moved past them both, kneeling by a tree and brushing her fingers across the soil like she was petting a living thing. "We started with 2 saplings and a dream. Marcus helped dig the first trenches. But after a while, he stopped showing up, said the work was too hard, that our dreams were too big." Clara crossed her arms. "Funny thing is, he didn't mind showing off the harvest when traders came around. Claimed it all like he'd done the sweating himself." Silas took a few steps forward. The smell was sweet, not just fruit sweet, but ripe. Bees hovered lazily above blossoms. The trees weren't just surviving, they were thriving. "How'd you get water out here?" he asked, more curiosity than suspicion now. June pointed toward the edge of the property, where he could just make out a network of narrow channels running through the dust. "We found a spring beneath the ridge, dug a line ourselves. Took a month, nearly broke our backs." Clara smiled. "But it worked. We irrigated the orchard, and from there we built everything else." Silas looked at them, their sunburned skin, their thick arms, their quiet pride. These women weren't just squatters or dreamers. They were builders, farmers, survivors, and maybe Marcus had run away because he couldn't handle standing next to something that powerful. June rose to her feet, brushing off her dress. "We didn't want another Marcus," she said. "We wanted someone who'd see what we've made, what we're worth." Clara's voice softened. "We're not asking you to pretend nothing happened. We're asking you to see the truth of it. This land isn't empty, Silas. And neither are we." Silas turned back to the orchard, the leaves shimmering in the wind like green flames. He had come looking for quiet, but maybe this was louder in all the right ways. By the time they got back to the barn, the sun had dipped below the hills, casting long violet shadows across the porch. June was already inside, pulling plates from a shelf while Clara lit 2 lanterns that bathed the room in flickering gold. Silas sat down slowly, still turning over everything he'd just seen. That orchard, the work, the planning, the irrigation system they'd carved out of stone and stubborn. Well, it wasn't a dream. It was real. Realer than most of what he'd seen back in town. Clara placed a steaming dish in front of him. Pecan pie, still warm, with the smell of browned butter curling up into the air like perfume. A scoop of fresh cream was melting slowly at the center. "You eat like a man who's been surviving on jerky and regrets," she said, settling into her chair with a grin. Silas took a bite and let out a small sound somewhere between a groan and a sigh. The crust was buttery and crisp, the filling rich and sweet with just the right kick of salt. June smirked as she sat across from him. "Told you he was dessert," sized. "Look at the way he reacts to food." Silas chuckled despite himself. "This might be the best thing I've eaten in years." "Then maybe you're in the right place," Clara said. "For the right reasons." Silas paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. "That's the thing. I don't know what the right reasons are anymore. I came here for space, solitude. Figured I'd clear the land, live quiet, keep to myself." June leaned in slightly, her gaze level and unblinking. "So why didn't you walk away the minute you saw us?" The question hit harder than he expected. He sat back, chewing slowly, thinking. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe because you didn't act like I didn't belong. You didn't try to chase me off. You invited me in. Even with everything Marcus did, you still gave me a seat at the table." Clara studied him for a moment. "We've been alone a long time. Kept folks at a distance because it hurt too much to be let down again. But Marcus wasn't the only mistake we made. Just the one with a signature on it." June's voice was gentler than he'd heard it before. "We don't need saving, Silas, and we're not trying to trap you. We just don't want to keep building something beautiful and never have anyone see it but us." Silas looked at both of them, at the scars on June's knuckles, at the quiet hope hiding behind Clara's confident smile. He set down his fork. "What happens if I stay?" he asked. Clara's answer was slow, deliberate. "Then we figure out what kind of life can grow here, not just from the soil, but from the parts of ourselves we've kept buried for too long," June added with a grin. "And you get more pie." The next morning brought the sound of hooves, not from cattle, but from a rider approaching fast. Silas was repairing one of the corner fence posts when he saw the dust cloud rise. Clara was on the porch with her sleeves rolled up, while June had just come back from the well, a basket of laundry at her hip. The rider didn't slow until he was nearly on them, a thick man with sunburnt cheeks and a face that looked like it had spent too long chewing tobacco and not enough time smiling. He dismounted with the casual aggression of someone who'd come to collect, not visit. "Where is he?" the man barked. "Where's Marcus?" Clara stepped off the porch, jaw tight. "He's gone. Sold his share, packed up and vanished." The man's gaze shifted to Silas, narrowing. "So you're the idiot that bought the deed?" Silas straightened, squaring his shoulders. "I bought the land. I didn't sign up for whatever mess Marcus left behind." "Well, too bad," the man sneered. "He owes us $600 in goods. Seeds, tools, feed, supplies we fronted on credit. He promised repayment by harvest, then skipped town." Clara opened her mouth, But Silas cut in. "I'll pay it." All three heads turned toward him. "You will?" June asked, surprise cracking through her usual sass. Silas nodded. "I've got some savings from my last property. Not enough to build new fences and pay for a well, maybe. But enough to make good on a man's debt even if I ain't the one who made it." The trader grunted, unconvinced. "I'll be back in 2 weeks. Have the money." He spat on the ground, mounted up, and rode off without another word. Silas exhaled, shoulders relaxing as the dust settled. "You didn't have to do that," Clara said quietly. "Maybe," Silas replied. "But you let me eat at your table. Let me see the orchard. You've put your lives into this place. I'm not about to let some bad deal burn it down." June stepped toward him slowly, wiping her hands on her dress. "No one stood up for us like that in a long time." Clara came closer too. "Not even Marcus. Especially not him." Silas shrugged, uncomfortable now. "Just seemed right." June was the first to close the distance, her hand lifting to touch his cheek, her thumb grazing the edge of his jaw. "You're too good for this place, Silas Crane. Or just dumb enough to believe in second chances," he said. And before he could finish the thought, Clara stepped up beside him and pressed her lips to his soft, deliberate, tasting faintly of sugar and smoke. June followed. Her kiss was warmer, firmer, edged with something playful and hungry. Silas stood there between them, stunned, lips tingling and heart racing. No one said a word, but everything had changed. The sun had long since dipped behind the hills, but Silas couldn't sleep. He lay on the small cot in the corner of the barn, staring up at the rafters as crickets hummed their nighttime chorus. His lips still tingled from the kisses earlier, and his mind wouldn't stop circling back to the look in Clara's eyes, tender and searching. And June, God, the way she held his face afterward like she was checking to see if he'd still be there in the morning. He sat up, ran a hand through his hair, and exhaled slowly. The barn smelled of fresh hay and worn leather, but under that, he swore he could still catch the scent of peaches. Maybe it was the orchard, maybe it was them. When he finally pushed open the barn doors, the air was cool and still. The moon was bright enough to cast long shadows over the grass. Light flickered inside the house, and without thinking, his feet carried him toward it. The door was unlocked. He stepped in. June sat at the kitchen table, a mug of something steaming between her palms, her hair loose around her shoulders. She didn't look surprised to see him. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, voice soft. Silas shook his head. "Too much in here," he said, tapping his chest. "And not enough room in here." He tapped his temple. She gave a small smile. "Clara's out back. Hasn't come inside since sundown. When she gets quiet like this, it usually means something's weighing heavy." Silas hesitated, then turned and stepped out the back door. There she was, sitting on the porch steps, arms resting on her knees, staring out into the dark orchard like she was trying to memorize every branch. She didn't turn when he approached. "I don't get close to people easy," she said before he could say anything. "Especially not men." He lowered himself beside her. The wood creaked under their combined weight. "I've noticed," he said quietly. Clara drew in a breath. When Marcus left, it wasn't just betrayal. It was confirmation that we were too much, too big, too loud, too needy. He made us feel like we were something to escape. Silas was quiet for a long moment, letting her words hang in the night like laundry drying slow in the wind. "You're not too much," he said finally. "You're just a lot. But a lot in all the best ways. Strong, smart, capable." She turned to look at him. "And what about you, Silas Crane? What are you?" He met her gaze. "I'm tired of running, tired of being small in all the wrong ways. And for once, I want to be somewhere that makes me feel full." Clara leaned in, her forehead touching his. Her breath was warm, her voice barely a whisper. "We've been waiting for someone like you. Someone who doesn't flinch when we get too close." She kissed him again, and this time, Silas didn't feel small. He felt chosen. The house was quieter than he'd ever heard it, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Clara walked ahead of him, her steps slow and deliberate on the creaking floorboards. June was already upstairs, the glow of lamplight casting wide shadows that danced across the hall. Silas hesitated in the doorway of the main bedroom. Everything in him told him this moment was different, not rushed, not born from hunger, but from something that had been simmering since the moment he stepped onto the land. Clara turned, her dress slipping from one shoulder, revealing skin sun-kissed and marked by labor. "You can still sleep in the barn," she offered gently. We're not asking for more than you're ready to give." But Silas stepped forward without a word. The room smelled of lavender and cedar. The bed was enormous, hand-built, the kind that didn't just hold bodies but held lives. Thick quilts layered in careful folds. 3 pillows, one of them untouched for months, maybe longer. June stood beside the window, her long silhouette outlined by the moonlight. She turned as he entered, and for the first time, there was no teasing in her smile. Just welcome, just warmth. "I never thought I'd share this bed again," she admitted. "Not after him." "I'm not him," Silas said, voice low but steady. "No," Clara agreed, stepping closer. "You're here, and you're still here." Silas moved slowly. He wasn't sure what was expected, what was allowed, but every glance, every breath, every inch of space that narrowed between them told him the same thing. This wasn't about possession or obligation. This was invitation. They undressed together, slowly, carefully, like people learning each other through touch, not haste. Clara's hands were calloused and steady. June's fingers moved like someone who had never unlearned softness. And Silas, caught between them, felt for the first time like he belonged somewhere. The bed creaked as they settled in, arms tangled, legs intertwined. The night hummed outside, but inside, the air was thick with quiet promise. No words were needed. The heat between them was enough. Clara brushed her lips across his neck. June's laughter, low and breathy, filled the room like the breeze before a thunderstorm. They moved with rhythm, not rush. With need, but not desperation. This was not about forgetting Marcus. It was about choosing something new, something better. Together, later, when the room was nothing but shadows and breath, and the world beyond the orchard felt impossibly far away, Silas lay between them, his arm over Clara's waist, his cheek against June's shoulder. "You sure this ain't a dream?" he murmured. "No dream would have made you fix that fence post," June whispered with a grin. Clara chuckled sleepily. "And no dream ever kissed like you did." He smiled in the dark, heart thudding slow and full. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was starting over. He felt like he'd arrived. It didn't take long for word to spread. A lone man, freshly moved in, living with not one but 2 massive women in the same house, on the same land, working the same farm. To the nearby settlements, it was strange at best, sinful at worst. The whispers came fast, carried by traders and travelers. People stared longer at the market stalls, spoke quieter when Silas walked past. One afternoon, while hauling sacks of grain into the cart, he heard it clear as day from 2 ranch hands across the way. Heard he sleeps between 'em like a prized calf. Might be a calf, but he ain't the one doing the branding. Silas's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. Not because he was ashamed, but because he wasn't entirely sure how to explain what they had. How do you describe something so gentle, so hard-earned, to people who've never known softness that didn't come with strings? When he got home, June noticed right away. "They say something?" she asked, drying her hands on a cloth. Silas hesitated, then nodded. "Doesn't matter." But it did matter. Because behind every smirk and muttered comment was a warning. You're not supposed to love like this. Later that night, Clara found him in the orchard, staring out across the rows of fruit trees he now helped tend, feeling like a weed in someone else's garden. "They don't get it," he said softly. "They think I'm weak, that I've been swallowed up." "You have," she replied, standing beside him, "and we're not sorry for it. You came here thin as bark, scared of your own shadow. Look at you now." He looked down at his hands, calloused, dirt-streaked, strong. "They think I gave something up." "You did," she said. "You gave up being alone. You gave up pretending you didn't want to be seen." June joined them then, arms crossed against the chill. "We built this place knowing folks would never understand it. That's why Marcus failed. He needed their approval more than our love." Silas turned to both of them. "What if they come for the land? Try to push us out? Say it's immoral or unnatural?" Clara didn't flinch. "Let them try. We've got papers, we've got crops, and we've got each other." June's voice was steady. "And if they do come, we fight smart. We don't shrink, we stand. Because no one gets to decide what kind of love is big enough for this land." The wind blew softly through the trees, carrying the scent of ripening peaches. In the distance, a lantern flickered inside their home. His home, now. Not a hideaway, not a mistake, a sanctuary. He took their hands, one on each side, and squeezed. They squeezed back. No fear, no apology. Silas knew now. Love this big would always draw stares. but he'd rather be stared at for standing tall beside them than pitied for ever standing alone. 3 months passed, and the orchard was humming. The branches hung heavy with fruit, and the irrigation lines that once trickled now flowed confidently, clean and precise. Chickens roamed freely through the back lot, fat and lazy, and the new paddock Silas had built was holding up through wind and heat alike. Every piece of the land felt touched by hands that cared. Clara oversaw the tool shed renovation, her sleeves rolled and hammers swinging like a woman born to build. June spent mornings kneading bread with her music humming through the windows, her laugh bubbling up every time Silas snuck a bite of raw dough. As for Silas, he'd never felt stronger. Not just in his arms or his back, but in the quiet places, in his bones, in his sense of place, his worth, his want. He'd come looking for silence, and somehow found a rhythm. After dinner one evening, the three of them sat on the wide porch Clara had extended with salvaged lumber. The stars spilled across the sky, bold and brilliant. A breeze rattled the wind chimes. The rocking chairs creaked like old friends. Clara took a sip of warm cider and nudged Silas's boot with hers. "Still thinking about running?" she asked with a sideways smile. Silas leaned back and looked out over their land. His land, too, now where rows of trees swayed gently in the moonlight. "Ran my whole life," he said. "Didn't realize I wasn't running from something, I was running to this." June reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We were never trying to keep you here, you know. We just hoped you'd want to stay." He nodded, fingers curling around hers. "I don't want to be anywhere else." The legal papers had been signed last week, a formal partnership agreement, all three names inked beside each other like the final stroke on a painting. Not a contract of romance, not an obligation, a commitment to something they were building together. A life, a home, a future. The debts Marcus left were nearly paid off. With Silas's help, they'd renegotiated the final balance and doubled their output. Even the traders who once whispered now tipped their hats with quiet respect. It turns out a man who stands beside women like Clara and June doesn't look so small after all. Inside, the fire crackled low. The table was still set with crumbs and the scent of roasted apples. Everything about it felt whole. Clara stood, stretching with a groan. "Bed's calling," she said, then looked back with a grin. "Big one. Big enough for 3, if I recall." June followed, barefoot and yawning. "Don't take too long, dessert boy." Silas laughed, rising slowly and watching the two women disappear into the warm light of the doorway. He paused once more to look out at the orchard green, full, alive. He hadn't just found a place to stay. He'd helped build a home. One bite, one kiss, 1 acre at a time.